The Mike Wagner Show is powered by Sonic Web Studios.
Hi, this is Mia Mosinzia, also known as Mia No Time for Love. Check out my latest book, Missing, available on Amazon.
The Mike Wagner Show, also brought to you by Illuminatical, the think tank of the future. The Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner, available on Amazon, highlighting the Book of David. And Heidi Tam Music, with her latest on HeidiTamMusic.com.
It's now time for the Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. The Mike Wagner Show can be heard on Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, YouTube, iTunes, Anchor FM, Radio Public, and themikewagnershow.com. Mike brings you great guests and interesting people from all across the globe. So sit back, relax, and enjoy another great episode of the Mike Wagner Show.
Hey everybody, it's Mike from the Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios, brought to you by our official sponsor of the Mike Wagner Show, international warring author Mia Mosinzia, Missing, available on Amazon, coming soon, Missing 2 to a bookstore near you. Also, the Mike Wagner Show is brought to you by Illuminatical, think tank of the future. The Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner, based on the life of King David, now on Amazon, and Heidi Tam Music. Check out the latest at HeidiTamMusic.com. We're here with a terrific gentleman who's an author, professor of religion, ethics, and peace studies at Notre Dame in the Keough School of Global Affairs. He studies restorative justice in context of the mass incarceration, religious toleration, and challenges in the pluralism in throughout the world. He earned his PhD from Harvard in religion, ethics, and politics, with his teachings in ethical, philosophical, and theological dimensions and restorative justice. And his new book shows how restorative justice having the potential to overcome racism and basically embedding an American justice system and a culture of retribution and violence. And live, ladies and gentlemen, plus dudes in beautiful downtown South Bend, Indiana, the amazing author, professor of religion, ethics, and peace studies at Notre Dame with the book Restorative Justice and Live the Religions. Ladies and gentlemen, the multi-talented Jason A. Springs. Jason, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me on your show. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's great to have you on, Jason. So you're a professor and author of religious, ethics, and peace studies at Notre Dame University in the Keough School of Global Affairs. You studied restorative justice in context of mass incarceration, religious toleration, and challenges of religious pluralism throughout the world. You earned your PhD from Harvard in religion, ethics, and politics, with your teachings in ethical, philosophical, and theological dimension of restorative justice. And your new book is showing how restorative justice having a potential to overcome racism, embedding the American justice system and culture in retribution and violence. And before getting all that, Jason, tell us how I first got started.
Well, I teach at the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies. It's an institute within the Keough School at the University of Notre Dame. And one of the things that I teach there are a whole range of classes about the different types of justice that need to be in place for peace and peace building to be more than just kind of promoting tranquil conditions. The idea is that in peace studies, that peace is so much more than just surface level tranquility, that if you can have conditions of tranquility, but if you don't have justice, there are numerous different forms of violence and injustice that are being done to people, and it's not really a quality peace. So in teaching about different kinds of justice, one of those forms was restorative justice that I encountered, which I've written a book about, and we'll talk about what it is here in just a few moments. I began teaching about restorative justice, and about the time that I started teaching about restorative justice as an alternative to the standard approach to justice in U.S. mass incarceration. About that time, a book was published called The New Jim Crow by a legal scholar named Michelle Alexander. And this book, it was kind of an instant classic. It's had a revolutionary impact upon our understanding of mass incarceration in the United States. And it presented a set of challenges that I wondered if restorative justice could meet and answer. Challenges about kind of the racialized dynamics in U.S. mass incarceration. So as I taught and researched and wrote about this, at some point, it occurred to me that while restorative justice is both a philosophy and ethical system, well, it's also a set of lived practices. And that if I was really going to understand the potential of this to have an impact and transform and challenge and overcome the challenges of U.S. mass incarceration, I was going to have to get outside of my office and out off the university campus and into places and spaces, neighborhoods and communities where restorative justice is currently being practiced. And so with that understanding, I set off into Chicago and began this process of exploration and meeting people and discovering really what I discovered was quite eye-opening and remarkable in terms of how community centers across the city of Chicago are currently implementing restorative justice practices to transformative effects.
Mm-hmm. And exactly what is restorative justice?
Okay, great question. So to define restorative justice, it kind of helps to begin by contrasting it with the approach to justice that the U.S. criminal legal system is currently based on. And so that kind of justice is referred to as retributive justice. Retributive justice thinks of justice as payback or retribution, hence the name.
Revenge. Uh-huh.
Payback for wrongdoing that takes the form of punishment. So somebody caused harm to somebody, and therefore it's necessary to cause harm to them to balance the scales of justice and hopefully deter future wrongdoing. So a retributive legal system focuses on three questions, namely, what laws have been broken, who did it, what does that person deserve, and more specifically, how do we punish them? So in contrast to retributive justice, restorative justice focuses on holding people accountable for wrongdoing, but doing so in ways that aim to repair the harm that was caused through the wrongdoing, and then tries to address the needs of the people who were harmed, as well as all the people affected, and ultimately to promote healing and open constructive paths forward in the wake of wrongdoing. So restorative justice is sometimes what we call victim or survivor-centered, in that it asks a fundamentally different set of questions. Those are, who has been harmed? What are their needs? Whose obligations are these? And then what are the processes by which those needs can be met and the harms repaired?
Okay. All right. That makes perfect sense. And of course, you talk about the old Jim Crow and the new Jim Crow. And what is the distinction between the old Jim Crow and the new Jim Crow?
Right. Well, the old Jim Crow was a shorthand name for the system of segregation that prevailed in the United States between between post-Civil War, after the end of Reconstruction, really, until the emergence of the civil rights movement and really the great accomplishments of the civil rights movement. That's overturned the old Jim Crow. So Jim Crow, as it was called, referred to the system of legalized segregation that, where people of color and especially Black Americans and African Americans were required to do everything from sit at the back of public buses to swim in different public pools, to drink from different water fountains, were segregated in different schools and so on and so forth across our country, primarily though in the South, but also in various other areas across the country. So that was the old Jim Crow. And so the new Jim Crow then is the book by that title really makes the case quite powerfully and compellingly that many of the same dynamics of social control that played out across racial lines in the old Jim Crow era, but did so legally and openly, and were enforced quite explicitly by law and the enforcement of law, that many of those same dynamics of social control have persisted beyond the great accomplishments of the civil rights movement and the doing away with old Jim Crow, but they've done so in the form of mass incarceration, and in particular through the war on drugs. This is the thesis of Michelle Alexander. And so she's able to demonstrate how actually through the 1970s and into the 80s and even into the 90s, that the war on drugs that was handed down from presidential administration to presidential administration and expanded across the U.S., and then the expansion of mass incarceration as the result, had a vastly disproportionate impact upon African American communities, but also poor communities of all colors, but even then disproportionately Black American and African American. And so You have many of the same kind of impacts of an informal form of segregation that's a little more difficult to see, and a little bit therefore a little bit more difficult to address. And so she names and makes this case. And at the end of her book, and it's a powerful and important book, she gestures to the possibility that one of the key that she names a number of ways that this could be changed, potentially. And one of those she gestures towards is restorative justice, instead of the kind of retributive approach to the criminal legal system that currently prevails in the United States. So that's what first raised the question for me. Hey, somebody needs to explore this. Somebody needs to test this. Somebody needs to see what's going on, what's happening, the potential to address these challenges that she's raised. And lo and behold, I found really quite remarkable things across the city of Chicago.
Mhm. And what was that one exact instance or that one precise moment that simply influenced you into getting involved with restorative justice? Or what was that event or anything like that?
Yeah. Well, as with so many people who work in universities as professors and teachers, for me, it was working with my students. Uh, and, as I taught, we're very lucky to have remarkable students at Notre Dame. They're very bright, they're very engaged, and they come in and they study with us at the Peace Institute and in the Keough School of Global Affairs because they don't just want to understand these issues and cases and circumstances in an strictly academic sense. They want to go on and try to do something about it. They want to have some kind of impact and change the world. And so I consider it a privilege to work with such bright and talented young people and hope and pray that maybe something they learned from me can inform some of the work they go out and do in the world, because, man, they are really special, by and large. And they asked me, they said, well, this is great that we have we've got the diagnosis from Michelle Alexander. We've got some case studies to look at and to examine. We've got kind of ethical and philosophical examination of what restorative justice is. But how's it being put into practice? Where's it being put into practice? They raised these questions to me. And I realized that, I was going to have to go out and explore some of this myself and maybe write about it and hopefully fill a hole in the literature by writing a book that could both convey and capture concretely some of what was going on, the potential and impact it had to make change, and maybe do it in a way that hopefully gave readers an idea of how it might be implemented in other communities and neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm. And it also made me think of South Side Chicago as well, too. You hear all of the news, he has a stigma of, gangs, drugs, violence, and everything, tied into the Watts section in Los Angeles, and of course, Harlem in New York. And of course, you got, I think, I'm trying to think of that one complex down in Miami. It's like Little Cuba and everything. And how does like South Side Chicago differ like from all the other ghettos or ganglands like New York, Los Angeles, Miami, or even say like go to even smaller parts like say Milwaukee or Rockford or even like Des Moines, Dallas, Phoenix, everything like that?
Right. Well, that's a great question. And what the question points to is kind of understanding the uniqueness of each of those contexts. The way many of those places you've just named, how they get presented in the 24-hour news cycle makes them sound like they're all the same, that all these places, and mostly many of them urban contexts and cities, are all the same, and they're all very violence ridden, and that's what we hear. And in some ways, that's the way the contemporary 24-hour news cycle operates. There's the old phrase that if it bleeds, it leads,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That people, news channels need attention, they need readers, they need people to pay attention, and really kind of sensational headlines are what grabs people's attention and hopefully sustains it as long as it can. So we hear about the violence, we hear about the conflict, we hear about the hardship, and we hear about that again and again, and we hear about that in ways that makes it sound like that many of these communities are basically the same and struggling with the similar things. And that's not really the case. Each one has a unique history. And if you look very closely and go in there, you'll find that the people who live there are real people just like those living everywhere else. and they have struggles, and they have hopes, and they have resources, and they use the resources that are available to them to try to make the best of what they can with what they have. And that's what I've discovered. And really, the stories that I encountered in these neighborhoods on the south side of Chicago and that I try to capture in the book are really quite remarkable. These are amazing people doing remarkable work, and it's transformational. It's not just a ghetto or a gangland. In fact, it's a place where some of the most pressing and important, I think, lessons that the rest of us can learn uh, are unfolding in the present moment.
How about some of the people that you encountered too, like their unique story? Like, say, they've been in the South Side for a long time, they got sent there for whatever reason, and some of the accomplishment and everything. Maybe just a few examples of that.
Yeah, sure. Well, one young man that I spoke to is by the name of Jonathan Little, and he grew up. Well, the neighborhood that I focus specifically on is a neighborhood called Back of the Yards. And it has a very deep and rich history in the history of Chicago and the history of the United States. They called it Back of the Yards, came to call it Back of the Yards back in the 1800s because it was the neighborhood just to the south of the Union Stockyards in Chicago, which came to be in the 20th century to be the largest in the United States. And so Eastern European immigrants, especially immigrants really from all over Europe, flocked there for the jobs and the waves of immigration. And there were tenement houses and really horrible conditions that cropped up there for the labor force. This was written of by the journalist Upton Sinclair in a book titled The Jungle.
I remember that book, The
Yes.
Jungle. Yes, I read that in high school. I remember. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. He's writing about Back of the Yards at the time that really it's exploding in population. And people there at that time were struggling with all kinds of exploitation and vulnerabilities and child labor and inhumane working conditions. And so really this was also a context then in the 1930s and 40s that a form of community organizing emerged under the kind of the design of a community organizer named Saul Alinsky,
Mm-hmm.
and which had a transformational impact on the neighborhood. By the 1970s, the Union Stockyards shrunk because of decentralization, corporate decentralization, and things like this, and the stockyards eventually closed and the jobs went away. And at the same time, processes in some cases of gentrification and the advent of things like suburbs and freeways cutting through cities to kind of move populations out into the suburbs meant that this was a neighborhood by the late 1970s that was predominantly poor, but also mostly African American and Mexican American. And what you have there is an under-resourced community even now. The resources for the schools are not very good. So Jonathan Little, I met, he was born and raised there, grew up there, and struggled, as so many young people do in these neighborhoods, with the challenges both of poverty, but also a lot of times explicit forms of conflict that come along with that. Himself never got to be involved in a gang, but he did find that one of the best ways that actually he was motivated to get involved with this was to try to take care of his younger brothers and sisters. His mother struggled as a single parent and struggled to feed their family, provide for their family as well as they could. And so he began selling drugs, he said, at the age of 17.
Oh,
And he said
wow.
it was a struggle. It was a struggle. And really, he says, he doesn't applaud anything like this. He didn't celebrate it. He doesn't celebrate it now. But that when your little sister wakes up in the morning and says, Mom, I'm hungry, and there's no food in the refrigerator, he says, you got to do what you got to do. And this was, there were no the fast food jobs available. Not that those would have been
Mm.
reasonable living wage in any case, but he was eventually caught and put in jail. And he had the good fortune as a first-time offender to have a kind of probationary opportunity He chose a job placement program in a local community center there in the neighborhood. And the center is called the Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation.
Uh-huh.
Started in 2002, and by a group of brothers and sisters of Catholic order known as the Ministry of the Precious Blood, Missionaries of the Precious Blood, actually. And they had begun by 2010 to integrate and use restorative justice practices. And so he said he was placed there for the 6 month program, but in the process, it was really an eye-opening experience for him. He saw people engaging in restorative justice practices to build relationships, to build community. He participated in many of these things. And he came out of the program and went to the director of the center, whose name is Father David Kelly, and asked if he could stay on and have a job there. And Father Dave is always looking. He's still the executive director of the center now, but he's always looking for young people who have come from and grown up in the neighborhood and neighboring communities
Hmm.
to be what they call credible messengers to the other young people in the neighborhood. They have a certain they have a certain ability to speak and connect with the young people who are growing up there and might be at risk for similar forms of harmful behavior or get into conflict and things like this. And Jonathan Little, at the time I met him, had worked his way into a position of being a case manager and a restorative justice leader, leading many of the practices of restorative justice, and had worked his way into a position of really being able to address many of the needs and the harms of the local community in a leadership capacity. And you talk about an inspiring story, and to meet a young person who grew up there, who overcame the challenges, who had, through engagement with this restorative justice center, had come to be able to really reach out and connect with large numbers of people who were just like him, but younger and at risk, and to help them find brighter opportunities, greater possibilities, more constructive ways of dealing with what they dealt with, and you know, open up more positive paths for the future.
Hmm. It also made me think of Cabri and Green because I had a guest on my show who was at Edward Dees or something like that, and he lived in that time too. There was also a project called Cabri Green that was designed for, you know, for those displaced from World War II, veterans got married, getting out of the war, and that was originally constructed to basically just have a place to live, get established, and everything. But then it resulted where it's end up being like a gangland, and you had the African Americans come in. So maybe if you can just give an insight of how Green Green changed from World War II families getting their starts to it stayed as it was.
Right. Well, in many ways, many of those neighborhoods that we consider in the south and west sides of Chicago now, the history is similar. It's one where, um, the over the course of the 20th century, in the early part of the 20th century, you have what's called the Great Migration of African Americans from the South to the Midwest. And you have, and they're migrating from the southeastern United States to escape the more explicit and draconian forms of Jim Crow, right? I mean, the impact of Jim Crow was present in the northern cities as well at that time, but it was nowhere near as bad as in the southeast, where there was the threat of lynchings and explicit violence and pretty constant domination. And so the city of Chicago goes from about 3% African American to 33% African American over the first part of the first half of the 20th century. And at the same time, you have kind of processes of industrialization and the emergence of post-industrialization, where many of the centralized forms of major corporate and industrial job opportunities starting in the 50s and 60s begin to diminish, which is why we call these industrial Midwest, northern Midwest cities part of the Rust Belt.
Mm-hmm.
And many of the jobs begin to diminish, And as the people either make it or they kind of stay stuck with where they are. If they make it, they tend to move out into what had recently been invented there in the middle part of the 20th century, the suburbs and subdivisions.
Mm-hmm.
And freeways are built to help transport them to and from. These are called urban renewal projects at the time, though they didn't renew the urban context. They help kind of remove people from them and get them in. So, this is a history that is pretty consistent across many of the northern Midwestern industrial cities. And so Cabrini Green is like that. Now, I should say that what the community center that I mentioned in back of the yards, Precious Blood, it's a community-based and kind of community-led restorative justice hub. So it's a community center that's focused on the values and the practices of restorative justice, and then it offers a number of kind of integrated or related opportunities for young people in the neighborhood, families in the neighborhood. It works to accompany and support these people. But it has, in the process of growing up in this neighborhood, it has come to work with a number of similar community-based restorative justice initiatives across different neighborhoods in Chicago. And they have begun to work together to support one another, to integrate their resources. And while each center and initiative retains its individuality and its own independence and autonomy, they nonetheless work together to collaborate, to support one another, and to grow together to form a citywide network or web of restorative justice neighborhood hubs that provide a really significant alternative to the standard path into and through the criminal legal system in Chicago.
Mm-hmm. That is rather interesting as well, too. Of course, there's a lot of conflict going on. Of course, there's been some conflict in certain areas as well, too. Ganglands, ghettos, certain projects and everything, but there's also a way to solve it, and that's a healthy way. We'll talk about your book as well, Healthy Conflict in Contemporary American Society with Jason Springs. We'll also get to your other book in just a minute, but first, listen to The Mike Wagner Show at themikewagnershow.com. It's powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit our line at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs, and if you're looking for a professional website without breaking your budget, Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable, customized designs that blow the competition away. Call today, 1-800-303-3960. That's 1-800-303-3960, or email to support@sonicwebstudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show, get 20% off your first project. Sonic Web Studios, take your image to the next level. Also, time to give an official shout out to our official sponsor of the Mike Wagner Show, international warring author Mia Molson-Zia. If you love fast-paced mysteries, you love Missing by Mia Molson-Zia, available on Amazon in paperback and ebook. Missing is fast-paced and intriguing with an unforgettable twist. Takes place in 4 countries, 2 strangers, 1 target, where truth is illusion and those who love me to first go missing. It's available on Amazon in paperback and ebook. Missing by Mia Molson-Zia has garnered great reviews, and Eve 11 enjoys by Howard celebrities, including Joanna Cassie, Forbes, Riley, and many. So grab your copy today for Goes Missing by Mia Molson-Zia, available on Amazon. Coming soon to Amazon, Missing 2 by Mia Molson-Zia, double the fun, double suspense. Check it out, coming soon to Amazon. Also, Mike Wagner Show is brought to you by Illumnifically, think tank of the future, bring scientists and engineers together from all over the world, creating a method to construct a renewable generator. This unique product operates on a closed-loop system, generating more energy internally than it needs to function. The XR electricity can be used to run everything from homes, power grids, phones, laptops. This power source is renewable, highly scalable, and most importantly, self-regenerating. Visit facebook.com/Illumniptical. That's ELLUMENIPTICAL today. Also, Mike Wagner Show is brought to you by The Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner, based on the life of David, including 30 exquisite paintings and King David Psalms. The Sweet Psalmist gives a new perspective of David through the Psalms he wrote in his time as a shepherd, where it started, and his complicated yet turbulent relationship with King Saul. It's a story of love, betrayal, repentance, hope, and more. Check it out, The Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner on Amazon. Keywords, Sweet Psalmist, Serena Wagner. Also brought to you by Hayatan Music, featuring a smash hit, Baby Come Back. New music coming soon. Check it out, HayatanMusic.com. Also, The Mike Wagner Show is broadcast for your podcast platforms, 100 countries. Go to MikeWagnerShow.com. Take us with you on any mobile device. Subscribe to us on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, BitChute, and Rumble, and more. For great gift ideas, go to Amazon.com. Check out the Mike Wagner Show podcast, T-shirts, pop sockets, throw pillows, tote bags, hoodies. Makes great gifts 24/7. Go to Amazon.com. Check out the Mike Wagner Show podcast. And for more great gift ideas, go to Amazon.com/Me and Molson Zia for great books like Missing, Once, and Wrinkles. Also T-shirts, pop sockets, hoodies, phone cases, and more. Amazon.com/Me and Molson Zia. Check it out today and support the Mike Wagner Show on Anchor FM, PayPal, and the MikeWagnerShow.com. We're here with the author of the book, Restorative Justice and Live a Religion, Jason Springs, here on the Mike Wagner Show. And before I get back to Restorative Justice and Live a Religion, the other book called Healthy Conflict in Contemporary American Society. Tell us more about that one.
Okay, yeah, sure. So that's a book I wrote previously. It initially appeared in 2018. And of course, there I'd been teaching classes about religion and public life, religion and conflict in public. This is the background that I'm trained in my academic training, my teaching at University of Notre Dame. And of course, that book works kind of philosophically and ethically to respond to some of the challenges raised by the way that sometimes religious pluralism and certain forms of intolerance can cause durable or persistent forms of conflict. And some of the case studies I work with in the book are case studies that were unfolding in the middle part of the 20 teens. So you think about, well, what was going on politically in terms of religion and things like this? Well, you can think in terms of, the presidencies of and administrations of Barack Obama and how they inspired responses by initially the Tea Party pushback, and then emerging into the presidency or first term presidency, as it turns out, of Donald Trump. And so this has, of course, been a very tumultuous time in our country. It's been a very politically and socially divided and divisive time. And I use many of the concepts that we work on and study in peace studies to try to think about the challenges that these cases and this particularly challenging and divisive and conflictual period of time in the United States raise. And so, we talk about, for example, the concept of conflict transformation and trying to think of conflict not as something that's a necessarily negative thing, though it can quickly degenerate into destructive forms, but rather to view conflict as something that, first of all, is inevitable in any time there's a relationship. You can think of this in personal terms or interpersonal terms, that anytime you're in a sustained relationship with another person, at some point in time there's going to be conflict. Mm-hmm. You're not exactly identical. There will be a difference of opinion. There will be reasons to spend too much time with anybody, and eventually
that's too much again, unless you're with a dog or a cat. That's a different story. So
exactly. But I get a little bit of conflict with my dog too sometimes. He does not do what I say right when I need him to. So and so the idea is that, well, if conflict is a natural and inevitable part of human relationships, interpersonal relationships, but also social configurations, how can we think about conflict in a way that doesn't try to see it as something that needs to be resolved or managed or held at bay as a bad thing, but rather to see it as a set of energies that can be engaged constructively and productively. And so this is the idea behind the concept of conflict transformation that we study in peace studies. And so I use some of a concept like that, and I use, like, for example, in a society of ours, such as ours, in the contemporary use, we actually have, it's kind of it's a good thing that we have the diversity that we do, right? And that it's a very rich diversity. It's kind of who we are as a people, but it brings a number of challenges with it. And a lot of times that's not going to be resolved by trying to find unanimity or sameness. We're going to have to find ways to move forward and persist in spite of our differences and with our differences, to try to think of our differences as a positive resource. And so I talk about strenuous pluralism, a pluralism that's challenging and it's difficult and it doesn't necessarily resolve into unanimity. But again, it enabled we're able to think and respond in ways that are more constructive and productive rather than to permit it to degenerate into destructive forms of conflict. So that's the idea behind the book, and that's really kind of what I did. And then the case studies I take and the ethical and philosophical resources I use are also kind of by and large, um, resources in that can be found in American philosophy and American literature in many cases.
hmm And going back to history of it too, with restorative justice or the pre as well, how has conflict been resolved back in the early days, way early days, and how can we apply it to it now?
Yes, yeah. So, well, I mean, the book that just appeared, the book Restorative Justice and Lived Religion: Transforming Mass Incarceration in Chicago. In some ways, it's a continuation of the earlier book, because restorative justice and the practices that constitute it, these are resources and tools that can be used to promote what it is I describe in the previous book as healthy conflict. And processing explicit sources of conflict, wrongdoing, harm, things like this, and coming to a repair of harm agreement, right? So instead of saying, what's the punishment need to be? How do we punish this person? And of course, when you're doing that in the context of mass incarceration, the punishment is pretty much uniformly going to relate to incarceration to some degree. The person may have a lighter sentence, they may get lucky and get on probation or something like this. It's never an easy thing to deal with, to be enmeshed in the criminal legal system. And it's never the single person that's enmeshed and harmed by that process. It's their family, it's their community, it's their friends and loved ones. This has mass incarceration, as we implement it in the United States, a very destructive thing. It destroys people, it destroys communities, and it does more harm to us as a whole society together than it does good. And it perpetuates itself and expands its numbers. It traumatizes people. And so it's really unsustainable in just about every way. Economically unsustainable, socially and relationally unsustainable. And it kind of hurts us altogether. We may think of ourselves individually as really not in any way related to criminal legal system or to mass incarceration, and we're like, individuals who say that, who can say that, are lucky. But when we think of ourselves together as a society, there's so much more we could be and do together if we could find a way beyond this current morass of mass incarceration as it has expanded and really run amok in over the last 60 years. And so this is what, here we look to these communities that are kind of ground zero, if you will, or individually ground zeros for these kind of struggles, to see, well, how are the people working there? How are they innovating? How are they using the resources that they have? And instead of just training our eyes on the explicit forms of conflict that attract attention and are a spectacle, well, the slower processes by which they heal and repair and rebuild community and overcome the historical harms that those communities have suffered. And there's the really valuable lessons that can be drawn. And for finding a way beyond mass incarceration, as we imprison more of our fellow citizens than any other country in the world.
Oh, that's sad. Even for the most petty offenses, you incarcerate people. That is just pathetic.
Yeah. It wasn't always that way, but starting in the late 1960s, there was, and this is part of the story that Michelle Alexander tells in the new Jim Crow. And it's really a remarkable story how she goes back and kind of excavates through court cases, through legislation, through policy, through social movements, through how people responded to what we look back and celebrate as the great accomplishments of the civil rights movement now. In many ways, were received in communities across our country as were experienced as kind of a threat in threatening changes. They were changes that were hard to deal with and respond to in ways that would be constructive rather than harmful and destructive. So, but what happens is the prison population, which is about 200,000 in the late 1960s, explodes to 2.2 million by
Oh
2010.
my
And
goodness.
if
Wow.
you pull back to include all the people enmeshed in the system, including people on probation and parole, that number goes up to about 7.2 million.
Oh my
And
goodness. Wow.
and then when you really pay careful attention to the impact that has on families, on neighborhoods, on communities, on cities, on communities across the country, um, it it's a very, very serious problem, and it's a problem where our approach to wrongdoing and harm and things like this does not solve the problem. It makes it worse, and that's what's happened over the past 60
Hmm.
years.
Hmm.
And restorative justice really offers a set of tested and successful ways of, for example, reducing what we call repeat offending or recidivism. And really, we have in our country not just the highest rates of incarceration in the world, we also have extremely high rates of repeat offending. So people who are caught up and enmeshed in the criminal legal system, even after they've served their time and fulfilled their debt to society, as we say, they come out usually so harmed and traumatized and vulnerable that large numbers of them resort to further wrongdoing and harmful
Hmm.
behavior. So
That's,
the system multiplies itself.
mhm.
And so the
Do,
question is, how do we stop that?
mhm. And do you think there's also a lack of trust involving law enforcement? Could that be part of it?
Yeah, that's also part of the problem that a lot of times in communities across our country, there has come to be, well, the approach to policing is consistent with the approach to a retributive, punitive oriented justice, where we think, well, if we just have a severe enough zero tolerance approach to wrongdoing and harm, that we can reduce it. And that's on the side of policing. A lot of times, that is results in kind of an us versus them approach to people out in the community, you know, seeing us, that is law enforcement, as the people who have the ability to use legitimate amounts of force and deadly force to do what we need to do. We kind of expect that the people out there are suspicious of law enforcement, are liable to harm us, and therefore we go in, whatever the situation may actually need. Sometimes it's situations that really law enforcement aren't the best people to respond to it. It could be a mental health situation, it could be a matter of homelessness, it could be a situation where a social worker might be a better first responder. But pretty uniformly, we pick up the phone and dial 911, and the person who responds, whatever the situation, whether it's a mental health episode, um, a lot of times we hear tragic cases where police come in, and in part because of a kind of deep division, divisiveness, and an us versus them mentality. And it goes both ways, but often will resort to forms of force and overuse of force, and even in some cases, police brutality. So restorative justice also reaches out to law enforcement people and says, hey, these are folks who are also being harmed by the harmful nature of the criminal legal system that has emerged and evolved in the United States. And restorative justice invites these people to come in and participate in practices that cultivate relationships of trust, relationships that are constructive, that try to work productively to move forward, to heal and repair, and build sustainable, healthy relationships.
And lastly, how can we help?
Well, in terms of your listeners, I would say, the number one thing to do would be to begin exploring, learning, educating, you're educating themselves on what this is. And I mean, there are a number of books I can recommend, but, the one I love to recommend most at this point in time, of course, is the book that I just wrote, Restorative Justice and Lived Religion, Transforming Mass Incarcerations in Chicago. And that's available on Amazon or wherever they happen to buy and order their books. It's published by New York University Press. in a book series called Religion and Social Transformation. So that's kind of the theme, of course, of what I study and address. There are other books, that I talked about. Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow is a wonderful place to start understanding the nature of the problem. And then another book that I rely heavily on in my own book, and which was also inspired me in many ways to launch into the research project across on the south and west sides of Chicago, is a book by a woman named Danielle Sered. She's a practitioner of restorative justice in Brooklyn, in New York City. And her book is entitled Until We Reckon. And it's also a very powerful account, especially of the ways that restorative justice practices can respond to explicitly violent forms of conflict and harm. So those are great places to start and to begin to explore. And then after learning and reading and getting a sense of what this is, to try to identify, hey, where are there instances of this that are being practiced in my own community, in schools, in churches, in community centers? And if not, could it be useful? And how might we implement it?
And that's a very good thing as well, too. What's coming up for Jason Springs? We'll find out just 1 minute. You're listening to The Mike Wagner Show at the MikeWagnerShow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios, brought to you by official sponsor of The Mike Wagner Show, international warring author Mia Mosazia Missing. Also brought to you by Illuminical, a think tank of the future. The Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner, based on the life of King David, on Amazon. And High 10 Music. Check out the latest at high10music.com. We'll be back with the amazing author Jason A. Springs of Restorative Justice, Live Religion, after this time out.
The Mike Wagner Show is powered by Sonic Web Studios. If you're looking to start or upgrade your online presence, visit www.sonicwebstudios.com for all of your online needs. Call 1-800-303-3960 or visit us online at www.sonicwebstudios.com to get started today. Mention The Mike Wagner Show and get 20% off your project. Sonic Web Studios. Take your image to the next level.
Hi, I'm Burl Baird, legendary American author, and I'm here to tell you about Missing, the new mystery suspense novel by Mian Mosanzia. It's really a good book. Very surprising. Never metaphor I didn't like, especially in this book. Here you have a main character whose life has been filled with despair. His wife died in 9/11. His young daughter died of a rare disease. He's not a happy camper. What does he do for a living? He's a physical fitness trainer. When somebody hardly knows, somebody he's never met, he only has encountered them on an internet chat line, goes missing. This is his journey. He's going to go rescue them. This is his search for redemption, his search for his own personal promised land. He couldn't do anything about the death of his wife, the death of his child, but maybe he can rescue this woman he's never met. That is, if she exists. Missing by Mian Mosanzia, international in scope, vastly entertaining, full of surprises. I suggest you get it in either paperback or an electronic edition for your Kindle. Missing by Mian Mosanzia.
Baby, come back.
Heidi Tan has a new release, the remake of Player's Baby Come Back.
Spending all my nights, all my money going out of the town.
With special guest, international recording artist Nils on guitar. And now with her own twist on the classic comes Heidi Tan 2023.
Baby, come back. Any kind of fool could see.
She delivers the punch you'd expect from a seasoned pro with this arrangement of Baby Come Back. Destined to be a chart topper, Heidi Tan, Baby Come Back.
The Mike Wagner Show is brought to you by Illuminical, the think tank of the future. Illuminical, a human think tank that brings scientists and engineers together from all over the world, has created a method to construct a renewable generator with this in mind. This unique product operates on a closed-loop system that generates more energy internally than it needs to function. The extra electricity can be used to run everything from homes and power grids to phones and laptops. This power source is entirely renewable, highly scalable, and more importantly, self-regenerating. For more information, visit facebook.com/Illuminical. That's facebook.com/ELLUMENIPTICAL today. The Mike Wagner Show is brought to you by Serena Wagner's book, The Sweet Psalmist, now available on Amazon. This book includes 30 exquisite paintings by well-known and unknown painters and King David Psalms. The Sweet Psalmist gives us a new perspective on his life in this book. Through the Psalms he wrote, his time as a shepherd in the field is where the book starts, and it goes on to describe his complicated and turbulent relationship with King Saul as well as other events. It's a story of love, betrayal, repentance, and more. It also offers advice advice on approaching God and living a life that pleases Him. Check out the book, The Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner, now available on Amazon. Keywords, Sweet Psalmist, Serena Wagner.
Hey, this is Ray Powers, and boy, are you in luck. Right place, right time. Tuned in to the Mike Wagner Show. You heard me.
We're back with author Jason A. Springs of Restorative Justice and Live Religion here on the Mike Wagner Show. And just one more thing about the book. And once again, where can we find the book at, and what's your website?
Right. Well, you can find the book on Amazon or really anywhere that you order books online or through your bookstore that you live nearby, maybe a local bookstore. It can be ordered it's published by New York University Press. And so the New York University Press also has a website for the book. And you could order directly from them if that's easier for you. My website is at the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies and in the University of Notre Dame. My faculty page, Jason A. Springs, which has a little bit about my background and some of what I've studied and some descriptions of other books that I've written and the kind of classes I teach and things like this. So I certainly invite any of your listeners to look at that. And if they would like, reach out to me by email, that would be absolutely fine.
We will certainly do that. We're here with Jason A. Springs of Restorative Justice and Live Religion on the Mike Wagner Show. Just a couple of things. What else can we expect in 2025 and beyond?
Right. Wow. Well, my own work is going to follow up on this current book. I'm going to continue to try to launching a project now, conceptualizing it. Drafting out some of the ideas for the book in kind of a blueprint or skeletal form. And because, part of what we do is we need to kind of get grants and funding in order to support our research in academia. That's what we do, kind of how the process works. But, to look at I'll be looking at a different form of justice that is both aligns with, but also in some ways challenges this concept of restorative justice. And that's what some practitioners and activists have come to talk about transformative justice. They say that restorative justice, while it is a powerful and successful response, that maybe it doesn't cut deep enough and transformatively enough. And I address this in a cursory way in my current book, but it's one where the debate is continuing to unfold amongst practitioners and activists, as well as scholars like myself. And so to kind of follow that, trace it out, and to build my own position on that, and then do so again in the context of how this is being implemented. And testing, what difference does it make? Is it a productive distinction, or is it one where we're better off kind of seeing restorative justice as having that transformational capacity in the first place? This is the next project.
All right, we're certainly looking for that, Jason. Who do you consider biggest influence in your career?
Well, I would have generally speaking, my mentor and teacher who really kind of helped set me on the path that I'm on is Cornel West.
Okay. He sounds amazing as well. What's the best advice you can give to anybody at this point?
Wow. Well, just best advice generally would be to keep hope alive. It's a general thing, that these days, so many of us are being confronted with challenges, whatever that may be, whether it has to relate to contemporary politics. We live in a very divided time, and or maybe it's interpersonal, or maybe it's economic. A lot of people are struggling financially and economically, jobs, things like this. And so, I part of it at the kind of philosophical and ethical heart or core of what I write and work on is the power of relationships to help people find hope, sustain hope, and turn that hope into productive and constructive action that can make a difference in their own lives and in their own communities.
And certainly great advice as well. Once again, with the author, Jason A. Springs of Restorative Justice and Live a Religion here on the Mike Wagner Show. Jason, very big thank you for your time. You're absolutely amazing. Learned a lot from you. Looking forward to having you soon. Keep us up to date. Keep in touch. We'll love to have you back. Once again, what's your website? How do people contact you? Where can people purchase or check out your book?
Yes, well, first of all, let me say thank you so much for having me on, Mike. This has been a spectacular conversation. I'm very, very much admire your work and your show. Again, the book, Restorative Justice and Lived Religion, Jason A. Springs. You can order it on Amazon. You can order it through the publisher's website, the New York University Press, or order it on you should be able to get it through any website you order your book. And my website is a faculty webpage at the Kroc Institute for International Peace. That's KROC. It was endowed by Joan Kroc, Ray Kroc's wife, who was a great philanthropist after he died. Much of the money that he earned through internationalizing the McDonald's restaurants, and one of the things she did was found a Peace Institute at the University of Notre Dame. So the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies.
We'll certainly check that out. Once again, Jason, a very big thank you for your time. You've been absolutely fantastic. Looking forward to having you again soon. Keep us up to date. Keep in touch. We'll laugh at you back. We wish you all best. And Jason, you definitely have a great future ahead of you.
Thank you, Mike.
The Mike Wagner Show is powered by Sonic Web Studios. If you're looking to start or upgrade your online presence, visit www.sonicwebstudios.com for all of your online needs. Call 1-800-303-3960 or visit us online at www.sonicwebstudios.com to get started today. Mention the Mike Wagner Show and get 20% off your project. Sonic Web Studios. Take your image to the next level.
Hi, I'm Burl Barer, legendary American author, and I'm here to tell you about Missing, the new mystery suspense novel by Mian Mosensia. It's really a good book. Very surprising. Never metaphor I didn't like, especially in this book. Here you have a main character whose life has been filled with despair. His wife died in 9/11. His young daughter died of a rare disease. He's not a happy camper. What does he do for a living? He's a physical fitness trainer. When somebody hardly knows, somebody he's never met, he only has encountered them on an internet chat line, goes missing. This is his journey. He's going to go rescue them. This is his search for redemption, his search for his own personal promised land. He couldn't do anything about the death of his wife, the death of his child, but maybe he could rescue this woman he's never met. That is, if she exists. Missing by Mian Mosensia, international in scope, vastly entertaining, full of surprises. I suggest you get it, either paperback or an electronic edition for your Kindle. Missing by Mian Mosensia.
Baby, come back.
Heidi Tan has a new release. The remake of Player's Baby Come Back.
Spending all my nights, all my money going out of the town.
The special guest, international recording artist Nils on guitar. And now with her own twist on the classic comes Heidi Tan 2023.
Baby, come back. Any kind of fool could see.
She delivers the punch you'd expect from a seasoned pro with this arrangement of Baby Come Back. Destined to be a chart topper, Heidi Tan, Baby Come Back.
The Mike Wagner Show is brought to you by Illuminatical, the think tank of the future. Illuminatical, a human think tank that brings scientists and engineers together from all over the world, has created a method to construct a renewable generator with this in mind. This unique product operates on a closed-loop system that generates more energy internally than it needs to function. The extra electricity can be used to run everything from homes and power grids to phones and laptops. This power source is entirely renewable, highly scalable, and more importantly, self-regenerating. For more information, visit facebook.com/Illuminatical. That's facebook.com/ELLUMENIPTICAL today. The Mike Wagner Show is brought to you by Serena Wagner's book, The Sweet Psalmist, now available on Amazon. This book includes 30 exquisite paintings by well-known and unknown painters and King David Psalms. The Sweet Psalmist gives us a new perspective on his life in this book. Through the Psalms he wrote, his time as a shepherd in the field is where the book starts, and it goes on to describe his complicated and turbulent relationship with King Saul as well as other events. It's a story of love, betrayal, repentance, and more. It also offers advice on approaching God and living a life that pleases Him. Check out the book, The Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner, now available on Amazon. Keywords, Sweet Psalmist, Serena Wagner.
Thanks for listening to the Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. The Mike Wagner Show can be heard on Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, Anchor FM, Radio Public, and themikewagnershow.com. Please support our program with your donations at themikewagnershow.com. Join us again next time for another great episode of The Mike Wagner Show.